In the fall of 1888, something evil walked the fog-shrouded streets of London's East End. 5 women were brutally murdered in a manner so horrific that it would haunt the world for over a century. The killer was never caught. The case was never solved. And to this day, the identity of Jack the Ripper remains one of history's greatest mysteries. But here's what makes this case truly chilling. The killer could have been anyone. A doctor, a butcher, a street vendor, someone who walked among the people of London every single day, hiding in plain sight. Today we're diving deep into the case that changed criminal investigation forever. This is the story of Jack the Ripper. To understand these murders, you first need to understand Whitechapel in 1888. This wasn't the London of palaces and parliament. This was the underbelly of Victorian England, a place where poverty, crime, and desperation ruled the streets. Over 900,000 people were crammed into London's East End, living in barely survivable conditions. The streets were narrow, dark, and dangerous. Gas lamps provided only flickering light, and thick fog rolled in from the Thames River, creating the perfect cover for criminal activity. Whitechapel was home to overcrowded lodging houses, known as doss houses, where people paid 4 pence a night for a bed. If you couldn't pay, you slept on the streets. Many women turned to prostitution just to afford that bed for the night. It's estimated that around 1,200 prostitutes worked the streets of Whitechapel in 1888. They were vulnerable, desperate, and largely invisible to Victorian society. And someone was watching them. The Metropolitan Police, established in 1829, was still learning how to handle major crimes. They had no fingerprinting technology, no DNA analysis, no forensic pathology as we know it today. They relied on witness statements, physical evidence that often got contaminated, and good old-fashioned detective work. But they were about to face a killer unlike any they'd encountered before. What happened next would shock not just London but the entire world. The murders began in August 1888, and each one was more brutal than the last. But the question that still haunts investigators today is this: did the Ripper kill 5 women, or many more? Let's examine the victims. Mary Ann Nichols, known as Polly, was 43 years old. Once a wife and mother of 5, alcoholism had destroyed her life and left her homeless. On August 31, 1888, at approximately 3:40 a.m., her body was discovered on Bucks Row. Her throat had been cut twice from left to right, and her abdomen had been mutilated. This was the first canonical victim. Just over a week later, on September 8, 47-year-old Annie Chapman was found in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street. The brutality had escalated. Like Nichols, her throat was severed, but this time, organs had been removed from her body with what appeared to be surgical precision. The newspapers exploded with coverage. Panic began to spread through Whitechapel. Then came September 30th, what became known as the double event. Elizabeth Stride, 44, was found with her throat cut in Dutfield's yard at approximately 1 a.m. Investigators believe the killer was interrupted, because unlike the previous victims, Stride's body showed no additional mutilation. The Ripper wasn't finished that night. Less than an hour later, and less than a mile away, 46-year-old Catherine Eddowes was discovered in Mitre Square. Her throat was cut, her face mutilated, and once again organs were removed. This time, the killer left something else: a piece of Eddowes' blood-stained apron, dropped on Golston Street, along with a cryptic message chalked on the wall nearby. The police erased the message before dawn, fearing it would incite anti-Semitic riots. To this day, historians debate what it actually said. The city was paralyzed with fear. Women were afraid to walk the streets. Vigilante groups formed. The police were under enormous pressure to catch the killer. But the worst was yet to come. The final murder was so horrific, so beyond comprehension, that the crime scene photographs were kept hidden from the public for decades. What happened in that small room on November 9, 1888, revealed something terrifying about the killer's psychology. And it gave us our only real clue about who Jack the Ripper might have been. Mary Jane Kelly was only 25 years old, much younger than the other victims. On the morning of November 9, 1888, her landlord's assistant knocked on the door of her small room at 13 Miller's Court to collect overdue rent. What he saw through the window would haunt him for the rest of his life. Kelly had been murdered in her own room, which gave the killer privacy and time. The mutilation was extensive and deliberate. Almost every organ had been removed and placed around the room. Unlike the outdoor crime scenes where the killer had to work quickly, this murder showed what the Ripper was capable of when he had time. Investigators noted something crucial. The level of anatomical knowledge suggested someone with medical training or experience working with bodies. The organs weren't just hacked out, they were removed with precision. After Mary Jane Kelly, the canonical murders stopped. No one knows why. So how did the police investigate these crimes? Detective Inspector Frederick Aberline led the investigation. He and his team conducted hundreds of interviews, followed up on thousands of tips, and pursued every lead imaginable. But they were working with Victorian-era limitations. Crime scenes were often contaminated by curious onlookers before police could properly examine them. Witness statements were unreliable, especially in a neighborhood where many people were drunk or afraid to talk to the police. And the killer left almost no useful physical evidence. The police did receive letters claiming to be from the killer. The most famous was the Dear Boss letter signed Jack the Ripper. This is actually where the name came from. Another letter, known as the From Hell letter, arrived with what the sender claimed was a piece of a victim's kidney. Were these letters genuine? Most modern experts believe they were hoaxes, written by journalists or attention seekers trying to capitalize on the panic. But at the time, they only added to the hysteria and made the investigation more difficult. The police brought in suspects, questioned them, and let them go. They had theories but no concrete evidence. As weeks turned to months and no new murders occurred, the investigation slowly went cold. Over 135 years have passed, and we still don't know who Jack the Ripper was. But that hasn't stopped investigators, historians, and amateur sleuths from trying to solve the case. More than 100 suspects have been proposed. Some theories are plausible. Others are downright bizarre. Let's explore the most compelling ones. Montague John Druitt, a barrister and teacher who committed suicide in December 1888, shortly after the murders stopped. Police at the time considered him a strong suspect, but there's no direct evidence linking him to the crimes. Aaron Kosminski, a Polish barber who lived in Whitechapel and was later committed to an asylum. A senior police official named him as a suspect years after the murders. In 2014, an author claimed DNA evidence from a shawl linked Kosminski to the crimes, but this evidence has been heavily disputed by experts. Dr. Francis Tumblety, an American quack doctor with a hatred of women and a collection of preserved female organs. He was in London during the murders and fled to America shortly after. The timing is suspicious, but again no concrete evidence exists. Prince Albert Victor, the grandson of Queen Victoria. This theory, popularized by various books and films, suggests a royal conspiracy. However, historical records show the prince was nowhere near London during most of the murders. This theory is largely dismissed by serious historians. James Maybrick, a cotton merchant who allegedly confessed to being the Ripper in a diary discovered in 1992. Most experts consider the diary a modern forgery. Joseph Barnett, Mary Jane Kelly's former partner. Some theorize he committed the murders to scare Kelly off the streets, but killed her when she wouldn't comply. The timeline and evidence don't strongly support this. Jill the Ripper. Some researchers have suggested the killer could have been a woman, possibly a midwife, which would explain the anatomical knowledge and why the killer could approach victims without raising suspicion. However, witness descriptions consistently described a man. The truth is, we'll probably never know with certainty who Jack the Ripper was. Modern investigators have applied contemporary forensic techniques to the case. DNA analysis has been attempted on preserved evidence, but contamination over the decades makes results questionable. Geographical profiling suggests the killer likely lived in Whitechapel, but that doesn't narrow it down much in a densely populated area. What we do know is this: the killer was likely a local resident, someone who knew the streets and alleys of Whitechapel intimately. They probably had some knowledge of anatomy, though whether from medical training, butchering experience, or something else remains unclear. And they were able to blend into the community so well that no one suspected them. But here's what might be the most disturbing aspect of this case. Jack the Ripper didn't just terrorize London for a few months in 1888. The legacy of these murders changed everything about how we investigate crime, how we view serial killers, and how society protects its most vulnerable members. The Jack the Ripper case marked a turning point in criminal investigation. These murders happened during a time when the field of criminology was just developing. The term serial killer wouldn't be coined for another 80 years, but the Ripper case helped establish the patterns we now associate with serial murder: victim selection, escalating violence, and a cooling-off period between crimes. The public panic forced law enforcement to modernize. The case accelerated the development of criminal profiling, forensic pathology, and systematic crime scene investigation. The Metropolitan Police learned hard lessons about preserving evidence and coordinating large-scale investigations. The media coverage of the Ripper murders also changed journalism forever. This was one of the first true crime stories to achieve international attention, thanks to the relatively new telegraph technology. Newspapers competed for the most sensational headlines, establishing patterns of crime reporting that continue today. But beyond the investigative techniques and media fascination, we should remember the real victims. Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. These were women living in desperate circumstances, marginalized by society, and forgotten by history until they became victims. Their deaths exposed the harsh realities of Victorian poverty and the vulnerability of women in that era. In some ways, their stories sparked social reforms that improved conditions in London's East End and changed how society viewed and treated the impoverished. Today, Whitechapel looks very different. The narrow, dark alleys have been replaced by modern streets. The area has gentrified significantly. But the ghost of Jack the Ripper still lingers. Tour groups walk the murder sites every night. The case continues to inspire books, films, television shows, and documentaries. Ripperologists, researchers dedicated to solving the case, still debate theories and analyze evidence. So who was Jack the Ripper? We may never know. Was it a doctor who used his medical knowledge to evade capture? A local resident who hid in plain sight? Someone whose name has been lost to history, their identity dying with them over a century ago? The mystery endures because it forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. That evil can walk among us undetected, that justice isn't always served, and that some questions may never have answers. 135 years later, Jack the Ripper remains unidentified, uncaught, and unforgotten. The case reminds us that some mysteries are darker than we can imagine, and some killers are never brought to justice. The streets of Whitechapel are safer now, but the legend lives on. This was the story of Jack the Ripper. If you found this case fascinating, let me know what unsolved mystery you'd like me to cover next. Thanks for watching.